Christine S. Escobar, and I'm the founder and editor of Represent Classical. And this morning I'm speaking to Armando Castellano, who is president, founder, and artistic director of Quinteto Latino. Founded in 2004 and based in the San Francisco Bay Area, Quinteto Latino is unique as both a professional wind quintet and a Latino music education network. Armando is the French horn player in Quinteto Latino's wind quintet, and he's active internationally as a chamber musician, soloist, and orchestral performer. So, Armando, your organization recently achieved nonprofit status, and the quintet has celebrated its 15th anniversary. Um, could you talk a little bit more about your mission, and has it sort of coalesced further because of these milestones?
Sure. Hey, thank you for having me, and thanks for asking me these questions. Yes, the nonprofit status was long planned, and we decided to press go on it right at the beginning of the pandemic. Indeed, the mission for Quinteto Latino is around we say it's an advocacy organization with a chamber ensemble at its core. So the advocacy pieces are around education, around performance, of course, in the wind quintet, and around Latino composers, and around advocacy in the education space and in the classical music space on behalf of Latinos and Latino issues in classical music. So an advocacy organization with a professional ensemble at its core, and the ensemble was the beginning of the organization, and we turned into an advocacy organization after about, I don't know, 10 or 11 years together. We decided there was just such a pressing need, and it was so natural for us. We only play composers who identify themselves as being Latino, Latinx, or Latin American. And so that means Latinos from both in the United States as well as throughout Latin America and the world, who identify as having roots from Latin America. And the music we play is generally just Western contemporary and classical music. It sounds like all the Western contemporary and classical music. It just happens to be by Latino composers. And the genesis of the organization was so that I could play composers that represented my identity as a Latino, as a Mexican American. I did not have the opportunity to do that. Going to conservatory, going to music school, learning music, to my best recollection, only performed white male composers. And so I wanted to create an organization and show the classical music world that you can have an entire performing arts organization, that there's so many Latino composers that you could do this and only play Latino composers. And I still have boxes and boxes of quintets. We'll never live long enough to be able to play all the quintets written by Latino composers. There's that many. And that's what I wanted to show the classical music field, that the issues are relevant, they're important, and there's so much music to play, even though we rarely play it here in the US.
That's great. Yes, I'm aware of the Institute for Composer Diversity, and I know that their catalog is, a portion of what is, available probably as they grow their catalog and their resource lists. And there's just so much. It's just amazing, how very few pieces are performed just in the United States alone. One of the things that struck me very much with your mission statement, I was looking at the website of the organization, is there's a statement there. It says to disrupt racial and economic disparities within the classical music field by championing past, present, and future contributions. I thought that was really significant because you're really naming the issues that are presented at this moment. And when you were speaking of playing the music of white male composers, it's funny because to this day, even in higher education curriculums, there's still there are the colleges and the universities that are trying to move toward living composers and things like that, and equity in terms of programming performances by different composers. But the curriculum in terms of music theory, in terms of music history, is really, really, really far behind. So it's wonderful that your organization is really addressing that.
I definitely see in my work professors and institutions trying to address this. And there's a couple of things I talk about in that. I also do consulting on these issues nationally. And in my opinion is it's a couple of things. One, it's that they like to change. They don't have the people or the tools to be able to make the kind of necessary, deep, long-term change. And also it's hard to acknowledge that you've been part of a part of an othering, a part of the systemic oppression. So there's that piece that's often missing in that work. And then putting resources towards the change. And there's monetary resources, expensive and time consuming, but there's also kind of heart resources that, again, that acknowledgement that you are part of a system of oppression and are perpetuating that. And I acknowledge my own perpetuation by playing and performing those composers, endlessly as well, without saying anything, and in the past. And then there's I think the final piece that in my opinion, is that the people that are in charge, the funders, the board members, the presidents, the administrators, it's a very white-led system. So if the change, and we're not seeing representation at those higher levels, those power broker levels, then it's very hard to trickle down to like actually where the musicology class is looking at more diversity or that the orchestra is performing a more representational compositions. So those trickle down things happen, I think, principally, in my opinion, at the top, because there's just people in power don't know how to start or move that conversation forward very effectively.
Right, and it's almost like sort of a balancing act. Where do you apply your focus? Do you, as with your organization, there's mentoring of musicians. There's the audition process. There's of course, you go out to the community, you travel, you toured the nation, and perform and speak to people about Latinx composers and music. There's that component of it, but then there's also, having to reach out and have people in the administration of these various places, because correct, like it would be very difficult for somebody without the lived experience to teach those types of courses and
to lead the change that needs to
programs.
happen across the department. Yeah, or even to lead it, it's very hard. So yeah, it's part of our problem.
Yes. With that in mind, I noticed something that was really a very sort of, I hadn't heard about it, but it was so interesting to me, was the Latino agenda that the organization formulated in the fall of 2020. And it's very concrete, it's very bold, and it's very specific. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, a couple of things I want to say. One is that the process that I try to live, and this goes in in our teaching artistry that we do at Quinteto Latino, with our audience development piece, or with this kind of our Latino agenda, which is that it not come just from me and my voice and my ideas. And I think the Latino agenda represents where we are putting the community's voice first in our processes and the kind of change that we want to see in the classical music field. So I'm not saying here are the things that should be on this agenda. We convene. We have every other year we have something called Seminario at Quinteto Latino, where we bring anywhere from 15 to 20 musicians together. We've had 2 of them, to come together to perform Latino composers. We form essentially several wind quintets, and then also to be a support network for each other. And the final thing is to build power together, and that's where this Latino regime then came. Hey, Seminario participants, they're all Latino musicians from the U.S. What do you think classical music needs to do to better serve you, retain you, represent you? And then they came up this cohort of 20 Latino musicians came up with what we call the Latino agenda. And the Latino agenda seeks to identify their tools that classical music can use when they're considering Latino musicians, board members, staff, funders, how to, again, retain, represent, keep, be and have cultural competency around these artists, these musicians, these staff members, these board members, these funders.
Mhm. So how are you making this available to the different, different orchestras, different music organizations, ensembles? How are you reaching out to let them know that this is available, that there's, conversations or information that, if they want to bring this into their organization or their group and apply, various ideas from it?
There's a couple of different ways. One is, well, it's on our website and it's available. We've been using it and talking about it and sharing it in our work, in our consulting work, in our performance work. I mean, these are things, what our constituent of 20 musicians came up with are things that indeed Quinteto Latino talks about in the field. So we talk about them in our concerts. We talk about them in our development process, in our fundraising process. We talk about them in our teaching artistry work, and so they're really a core part of the organization. And in fact, the DNA of the organization, many of those ideas came from. And so it's a natural place for us to start many conversations, again, from contracting to fundraising, to teaching artistry, to performance, to audience development, to discussions with presenters. They're a kind of core part of our work, and we hope to expand on them, codify them, put some benchmarks behind them in the future as we have more seminario events in the future and more artists coming on.
I also recently got a chance to watch, I think it was the second episode in the California Adelante webinar series that you have on your YouTube channel. Great. And that was really great. I was able to see the episode where you spoke with the California-based composer Jesus Plasencia, and he recalled in sort of the middle of your talk, he recalled a story that a moment that happened to him in his music education as he was a teen. It was a very painful moment, and it's there are these lived experiences that musicians have, whether it's childhood, college, professional experiences, teens. And I obviously this informed, he was speaking about how it informed his professional life and working with students, working with how he makes sure that he doesn't let these various things get missed, that he experienced. And also obviously the idea that missed opportunities that was part of his experience. As far as the lived experiences, I feel that the musicians not only take that into their perspective of the industry, but also, I'm wondering, does this inform sort of the playing, the expression of the music as well? Not necessarily the painful moments, positive moments, cultural moments, influences that you have as far as music that you grew up with. That is, I know for example, I'm Filipino and Greek and Irish, and my son is a musician, and he is very active in finding out a lot about Filipino composers, and he's a composer as well. It informs his music in terms of influence. Do you feel that as far as a performer, as a French hornist, do you feel that cultural experiences also inform your expression of the music?
Well, undoubtedly. I have a lot to say on this topic. This is a big topic that's evolves. I continue to learn from. I learned about this and the experiences of the artists in the seminario cohort of musicians I was talking about, how they navigate these issues and how it affects their musicianship, about talking about with students in conservatories that I work with as a consultant there, and how their journeys around this issue. And I have a couple of examples. One is that I have found, after playing so many years of Latino composers, that with Quinteto Latino, and so all 5 musicians, it's a multiracial group, and all 5 musicians are trained in music schools. So, right, so we had the same colonized education, all 5 of us, okay, of a nice a nice mix of diverse white male composers, and mostly straight facing. Let's just put it that. Let's just say they have straight identities, whether they were or not. That's what we were taught. So with that, that's what we're fed and what we were brought up on. And then after playing these composers that are Latinos for so many years, and I remember the beginning was very hard because the music felt different to us, and we had to decide what was going to be our take on the music. Our if we played something that was inspired by a folk song, should we move towards a folk song, try to play it like that, or should we put our contemporary spin, or go to our training and then have that be the seed for the musicianship, or is it a combination of all those? And that's that. And because we've been together for so long, that we can have navigate that and spend years, trying different things and deciding. I think ultimately in the end, I lean towards what brings us the most joy in terms of how we play something. How does this communicate most effectively what our interpretation is to the audience, and worry less about the inspiration from the folk or even our own training, and just rely on ourselves as musicians and what is most inspiring to us and therefore the audience that we can convey to them. Another story around that is I was talking to a musician recently, a mentee, and he was asking my advice on some things, and I was talking about it, and I'd heard him play before, and what I told him is I really I think you're a good musician and you sound good. What I hear when I talk to you as a mentee, he's already a professional musician. When I talk to you, you're so excited, you're very animated, you have a lot of ideas, you're incredibly diverse in your experiences. And then I hear you play, and I didn't say I'm bored, but I just what happens? You lost me when you play. You're not this expressive, beautiful man who's very politicized and very open and very clear, becomes this musician that this is not the same person. I feel like your musicianship, what happens? And I need that excited, diverse, politicized, woke man to have it come out of his flute too, or his instrument, or whatever instrument. And he was sharing with me that he felt like he had been that person early on in his career as a flute player, and it had been kind of taught out of him. Like the teachers had taken that away from him, or told him to not do that, or didn't accept that expressive man through his flute. And so, and how painful that was for him, and also me challenging him to let that come out. They're not there anymore. Just be yourself. And I don't think that journey is unique at all. I know it's happened to me too. And so, but I feel a lot of inspiration and joy from younger musicians who are in conservatory now, in school now, really questioning the system and questioning how their teachers teach them and what they're playing. I appreciate that happening. I want to support them as much as I can.
That's great. Yeah, this is a really, I think, a really good moment. I think, obviously, having experienced the events of the past year, I feel like the momentum is with us to sort of move forward with this. And as you say, the newest generation that's in music schools right now, I think I read something that their generation is going to be the first generation that's not minority, it's not going to be majority white. So that obviously there's work to be done in terms of who's leading programs, who's leading organizations and orchestras and whatnot. But do you feel like you're seeing the change, the rapidly changing landscape, or sort of seeing some of that on the horizon at this moment right now?
Well, I mean, I definitely see a change in the last year.
Mhm.
Just in my own work, like how we can talk about racism and white supremacy more openly, whereas before we would talk about equity and diversity. Now I can actually say racism and white supremacy more readily, so that's one thing. Another thing is, you know, the way I talk about the musicians, and as if they can survive and be professional musicians, like what happens when a child starts in kindergarten, and all the things you have to do before you can become a professional musician and graduate from music school and find work playing. What happens there? Where do kids who want to do that fall off, and where do they able to stay on and keep going? What programs or things are happening to them that when they're going to fall off, somebody or someone or organization pushes it back on and keeps them on track? And I think what's happening is more and more of those students are getting higher, whether they're really achieving, being able to make money, paying their instrument, how many are doing that, and what do those people look like? Because I think they're getting higher and higher and surviving farther and farther, but too many are still falling off. And our advocacy and education work is around why. Why is that happening? What programs are keeping them on? I live in a state, California, which has almost 50% of the students in public schools are Latinos. 50, half. Every other student in a public school in California is Latino. Now, when I play in an orchestra, in a professional orchestra, usually I'm the only one, maybe one other, maybe. So that's what I mean about, like, okay, if you have 50% of the students, I'm sure some of them want to be classical musicians. Why are all of them falling off and nobody able to survive to the point of being able to? Now, it could be that they're here. I think part of it is just they're not being hired.
Yeah.
It's a very closed system. The contractors are, they hire people that look like them. Why not? Why wouldn't they? Who's right in front of them? Who's normally been hired?
Right.
And then, so hopefully this BLM movement we've had in the last year or so is going to make some of these contractors think, oh my gosh, who have I been hiring? And maybe who should I think about that looks different than me, that I could hire? That's what I hope. Now, those just these are all really big topics about this. These are the top of mind issues that come to me when we're talking about them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just going back and looking at, videos of orchestras from the 70s, very few female faces in the orchestra, even, 60s, 70s, even 70s, honestly. But then now, you don't see that as much. And then, what you were saying in terms of the comfort level of people who are, they're more comfortable hiring somebody that looks like them, they have experience with, but that doesn't mean that they can't get comfortable, understanding what needs to happen, and have the experience, and understand, well, and like you said, the leadership at some point, expecting, white leadership to get to that comfort level at the expense of people who are trying to come up through the industry, come up through music, that's a long time coming. It's really something that could actually be accelerated if the leadership and the hiring could actually reflect more the population. And it's interesting that you said about how many students in California, and I worked for a youth music organization, one of the largest in the Midwest. And again, a lot of the students, what a significant population of non-white students in the organization, but it's and I was, with them for a number of years, not just as a parent, but then I also worked for them. But then you didn't see that reflected in competitions, in terms of jobs, in terms of, I did the alumni news for them, in terms of what are the alumni up to now, and who's got the professional jobs, and who's still working in the industry. You didn't see that same sort of match as to the population of students that they educated. One thing that I read was that in middle school there's a huge drop off with students. Are you finding that that is a crucial moment, that you need to reach students in terms of music at that middle school age,
Well,
preteen?
yeah, no. I mean, an important issue, and I think that it's bigger than that. I think for the way I talk about the work is that is if we can just look at the difference between a white majority school and a color majority school. So, and you will see big differences in the number of minutes per a child is spending in art, in any kind of art, the level of ability level of the instructor between white majority school and the brown majority school, whether it happens during school or after or before school, whether they give everyone access and choice or only certain students have access and choice, whether it's done by a tenured credentialed teacher or by a parent or other volunteer, contractor, outside provider, whether it has stable district funding or whether it has unstable, philanthropic temporary funding. Those are unique differences that are ingrained in the systemic problems that bubble up to what you're talking about, even when you have a youth orchestra, who's being highlighted, who's up front, what do we consider success? What is, and it goes into another thing I talk about, which is what is quality. So where in our system in classical music, we see quality often as both great musicianship and inherently pleasing to us, and kind of evoking of the audience member of feelings. And those two things really go into quality. And what I've been trying to talk more about is a third type of piece for quality, which is around cultural competency and an ability to communicate with the audience members. So that actually, this is incredibly important, maybe even more important than those other things. What I find is that, like, if you made it through the music conservatory, you pretty much have those two things. Like, you don't survive as a BIPOC musician through a music school, through that training, unless you are a good musician and a very high quality player and are able to sound good and make some music. But if you cannot, I find as many classical musicians are not good at the cultural competency piece, communicating with audiences. And I see quality as all three of those. And this third one is what's really lacking. Most musicians have these two. This one is harder to get. And I think if you have this other one, you'll be able to speak to your audiences. So having arts organizations have the cultural competency, essentially, to do better audience development and speak to more diverse audiences.
Right. That's definitely something that I've been thinking about, in terms of, we saw a lot of, possibly some, at times it was genuine, at times it was performative, inclusion over the past year of different musicians, in terms of and also different musical programming. But with live performance coming back, you sort of wonder, how much of that is going to be lasting, how much of it was out of desperation, or it's, I do think that there is quite a bit of really good stuff still happening. But like you said, the cultural competence and being able to relate and being able to reach your audience, whether whatever urban setting, sort of traditional setting, anything, those are things that I think a lot of music organizations were forced to reckon with over the past year, not just in terms of the pandemic with, we've got to bring everything online, but just who are we actually reaching? You know, who is actually, I mean, because if you think of the traditional classical music audience, you're going to see a lot of, you know, you're going to see a lot of white faces. You may see a lot of older audience members. And some of those people may or may not be attuned to doing things, watching performances online. It just might not be something that they are interested in. They might not, you know, a lot of them have gravitated toward it, but, you know, you kind of wonder. What I've seen a lot is a lot of different, you know, new organizations and new ensembles and musicians doing really creative things online, doing really creative things, and that's sort of translating itself into live performance. So you do hope that that continues,
Possibly. Mhm.
you know. um, so I want to ask you a little bit what's coming up in the near future for Quinteto Latino. Any new initiatives, programs, or live performances on the coming horizon?
You know, here's what I want to focus on for next season. I've been telling the organization, and one is that we've just been through so much in the last year and a half. It's been really hard to stay together, to stay afloat, to be here. You know, we are inspired and amazed at the larger institutions, which are mostly white-led and white-run, and because they have access to that funding, where smaller nonprofits like ours, especially the color-led ones, I really worry about them falling off the radar and losing momentum, that are hard-earned momentum. So, and us too, you know, Quinteto Latino having access to funding, good multi-year general operations support funding really hinders our lack of access to that. We have some, but really hinders our ability to move forward. So my hopes for the near future are we're, you know, leaning into what's happening regionally even more. We're good regional partners. We have a lot of regional partnerships and contracts, but doing that as much as we can as we slowly come out of the pandemic. So we hope to have our a series of concerts next year that we program ourselves. We normally don't self-present, but we're going to continue doing that. Next, at the end of next season, we'll be having our next Seminario Institute, which we're planning on right now for the end of next season. And I'm really excited about the pieces in our formal concert next year, which include a commission by the composer Gabriela Lena Frank called Mitos, which we also do as a residency project in schools, which involves theater and a multidisciplinary art. And we also have another commission by a New York-based Colombian American composer named Felipe Sachicha Nieto, called Cusa. And those are two pieces as part of we have two commissions next year for our formal program, which is really rare for us because they're very expensive and very hard to find commission money. So we have two. And another piece called Puzzle Tocas by a composer from Mexico City, which is a standard rep, which we love playing that one. And so I'm excited about those three pieces, to be doing some self-presenting and to lean into our regional partnerships. We actually just started coming, we played a few concerts in the last few weeks. We played at 3 schools, which was amazing that the schools let us come in because we have strong multi-year partnerships with them. We're the only outside service provider that was allowed in that school before the school year ended. And we also played at a community center that had launched a grand opening for a building called, the community center is called Casa Círculo, and they provide free art and music and lessons to the Latino community in Spanish there. And it's a great partner for us. We played at their quintets at the launch of their building. So, you know, leaning into regional partnerships and continuing to be able to perform these composers that we have commissions from.
That's great. It sounds really wonderful. A lot of exciting stuff coming up in the next year. Thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me. It's been really my pleasure to learn more about Quinteto Latino and speak with you this morning.
I love talking about this stuff, and I love mostly sharing what a community of Latino musicians cares about and thinks about, and how classical music as a system can better support them. That's really what I hope to do. So whenever I'm allowed to do that, I'm really excited. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Sure. Thank you so much. And best of luck with everything in the future.
Thanks, Christine. Great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.